Now.
On 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
7:06, O'Connor and Company here on a very loaded Friday morning. I should just stop modifying it because the news cycle is going to be jammed full.
It was like this last Friday, too,
it's
though.
It's going to be like just through the election and then after the election, and this is
that just means everyone has to keep it here.
That's right,
WMAL.
Because you don't want to miss anything. And if you did miss anything in our first 2 hours, please subscribe to and download the podcast. It's actually an ad-free, well, I shouldn't say ad-free experience, but it's a very different experience than you get every morning here on the program. It's a podcast experience, and we spent our entire first hour analyzing all the testimony coming out of Fulton County, Georgia, with Fani Willis and Mr. Wade and all that jazz. So get that podcast. Also coming up at 7:35, Matt Schlapp is going to join us. And 8:05, Tom Rousey of WJLA. I keep wanting to say K. What am I in L.A. right now? WJLA. He covered the fire in the metro station yesterday. All right, let's get right to it.
Okay.
High drama down in Fulton County as the judge is hearing testimony as to whether Fani Willis has acted improperly as the prosecutor in the very expansive Trump criminal trial for the events that took place after Election Day back in 2020. It was, let's bring in our legal analyst here, Hans von Spakovsky, who not only is a lawyer, an election law expert, and also was based in Fulton County, Georgia. So Hans, you're sort of the key person to come in and comment on this. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Patrice, Larry, thanks for having me.
Also, let's not forget your current stellar affiliation with Heritage Foundation. We love Heritage, and we love everything you're doing there, of course, Hans. So you tell me what you saw yesterday from your district attorney and Mr. Wade, the special prosecutor that was brought in for what is basically the most consequential criminal trial of our lifetimes, considering the political ramifications and the unprecedented nature of the racketeering charges for the president's lawyers and advisors and a former president who's now running for re-election all at the same time. This is a big deal. You saw Fani Willis yesterday. Is this business as usual in Fulton County? Is this how you guys do your business down there?
Well, I tell you, it was quite something seeing how arrogant and belligerent Fani Willis was in the case. And I was actually disappointed in the judge. Listen, her belligerence, her arguing with the lawyers who were questioning her rather than answering the question was so far worse than anything that Donald Trump has been sanctioned for. Yeah. Donald Trump's been sanctioned for his behavior in the courtroom. Hers was much worse, and yet the only thing the judge did was a couple of times he warned her that her testimony would be struck. But he basically let her run amok. I don't think she did her case any good.
Yeah.
And in particular, she displayed such a lack of credibility. As you know, that there was a big focus on the trips, the luxury vacation trips that her lover Nathan Wade had paid for, and they had no receipts for them whatsoever. She just kept saying, oh, she keeps large amounts of cash at home, and she used that to pay him off. Let me tell you about that very quickly.
Okay.
If Fani Willis was criminally prosecuting a mobster or a drug dealer, and that was the excuse they used for having large amounts of cash at home because, oh, my father told me I should always have it, he would be that defendant would be laughed out of the courtroom. Nathan Wade
laughed out of the courtroom in handcuffs to a cell.
Yes, exactly right. And Nathan Wade, look, he was shown up on the stand. He was constantly evading, trying to answer questions. Compare them to the third witness. The third witness, longtime friend of Fani Willis's. She's known her since college. They shared housing together. Fani Willis even hired her. She clearly was there reluctantly. She did not want to be there, and she had the most credibility of those other two evasive witnesses, and she basically showed that what Fani Willis and Nathan Wade have been saying is a lie.
Well, and that's huge, Hans. I mean, I think the same thing. I mean, so before both Willis and Wade took the stand, her testimony was what had been seen, and I think there was a lunch break after that. And watching a lot of the cable commentary during that lunch break, it was clear from CNN to MSNBC that the witness's testimony was damning for their case. That it seems like they absolutely lied. But you're saying that after hearing everything yesterday, you still think that the witness testimony trumps Willis and Wade's testimony.
Oh yeah. I don't look. The judge may not have kept the control of the courtroom he should have, but I can't help thinking that Fani Willis's combative behavior, refusal to answer questions, and frankly, her self-righteous attitude is not going to help her when he's making his decision. By the way, I have to tell you, look, I still know people who work inside the Fulton County government, and they have all told me privately that nobody likes her on the staff because she acts like such a diva.
Yeah.
And we saw that behavior
yesterday
in the courtroom.
It was more, it wasn't, Law and Order Atlanta. It was Real Housewives Atlanta. So, Hans, where do you think this goes? There will be more testimony today. I don't know what more the judge needs to see here. Well, give us the legal question here. It has to do with whether she has improperly benefited from this prosecution.
Yeah, the reason everybody needs to understand, the reason they were focusing on those trips and the claim that Fani Willis supposedly paid him back for it is, look, it's a violation of both Georgia state law and federal law for a vendor to give kickbacks to the people who have hired him. In this case, she, as an employee of the county government, hired Nathan Wade, paid him hundreds of thousands of dollars, and then went on luxury trips with him. If she didn't actually reimburse him, and they didn't make a very good case for her claim that she actually reimbursed Wade, then that could be considered kickbacks. And I said that's a violation of state and federal law.
And we've got more with Hans, and we're going to keep him over here for a second segment. But Hans, if you're to believe them that she reimbursed him, there is no paper trail. Every transaction is with cash.
Correct.
There's no paper trail or receipt showing her paying him the cash back, and there's no paper trail or receipt showing him depositing the cash that she allegedly gave him. So it all goes down to their credibility. The judge needs to just decide if they are telling the truth. Is there enough there? I mean, does the judge say, listen, this is the district attorney, an officer of the court. If she says she paid it back, she paid it back. Is that enough?
I think that would be a huge, huge mistake and would give Donald Trump and the other defendants a solid ground on any appeal to overturn any conviction.
Yeah.
And they haven't even gotten to several other very important points about ethical violations by Fani Willis.
Well, in a moment, we'll get to those ethical violations. I know you've got them, and I know that your colleague and our friend Cully Stimson just wrote about it over at Daily Signal. So we'll get to that in a moment. And also, by the way, we're expecting a verdict possibly in a trial in New York against Donald Trump, and we're expecting a decision from the Supreme Court about the president's team asking for blanket immunity with regard to the charges from Jack Smith. So we got all that, and we'll get to it with Hans von Spakovsky in just a moment. But first, it's 7:15. WMAL traffic and weather every 10 minutes, first on the fives.
WMAL.
Making sense of the news.
Live
from the Home Paramount Pest Control Studios.
Home Paramount, the leader in pest control since 1939.
On the next Vince Coglianese show, the stories ripped from the headlines and translated into the truth. Join us 3 to 6 on WMAL.
We did learn, though, yesterday that Fulton County DA Fani Willis does not like wine as much as her paramour.
She's a Grey Goose gal.
She likes her Grey Goose. That's right. That was some of the better testimony. Hans, well, for real, to touch on some of the other ethical questions that might come up today, if you don't mind.
Well, there's not to be any evidence produced about one of them, because apparently on Monday, when they were setting up what was going to happen today, the judge said he didn't need to hear any witnesses about it. He was just going to apply the law to it, which I don't think is a good sign for Fani Willis. And what it is remember, she gave a very public sermon at her church in which she claimed that all the motions being filed by the defendants to recuse her were because the defendants were racist and there was racial animus behind what she was doing. That is a absolute violation of the professional code of conduct that governs lawyers. Prosecutors are not allowed to make extrajudicial statements, in other words, statements outside of a courtroom that could result in public condemnation of the accused defendant. Well, that's exactly what she was doing. The second issue, and I think it'll get, at least the order will get introduced today, is remember, when she was subpoenaed by the ex-wife for her deposition in the divorce case, she filed a motion for protective order with the divorce court. She asked the court to basically squash the subpoena and said, I should not have to give any testimony in this case because I'm a DA and I'm involved in an important criminal prosecution. And in fact, I need time to investigate the wife for interfering with a criminal prosecution. That is also an absolute violation of the professional code of conduct, because you see, what she was doing was she was threatening criminal prosecution in order to gain an advantage in a civil matter.
Ridiculous.
And you cannot do that. You can't threaten a criminal prosecution in a civil case. And you all recall what happened right after she threatened the ex-wife with criminal prosecution. The divorce case was settled.
In January. So as we wrap up, I know we've got a few other cases to ask you about, but what happens next? Is it possible that she is thrown out and her entire team is thrown out? And what does that mean?
Under Georgia prior precedent, court precedent, if she is recused, and Nathan Wade obviously also, the judge should actually recuse her entire office, everyone who worked with her. If his options then, I don't think he'll dismiss the case, even, although he could do that. What he then will do is he'll transfer the entire case to a different county in Georgia. There, the new DA will have to reevaluate the case and decide on his or her own whether to continue with it.
Wow.
If I could move on quickly now to the Supreme Court decision that we're expecting any minute now on the immunity. Well, there's a couple of questions here. The first Supreme Court decision we're waiting for is out of Colorado there with regard to the ballot issue. What are you expecting there, and how sweeping will that decision be?
I think we will get a decision. I mean, it's possible it'll be 9-0, maybe one or two defections from that, but I think we'll get a decision overturning the Colorado decision, and I think the decision will be broad enough so that any and all other challenges in all other states will be ended.
And you do think that it'll be possibly a 9-0 or maybe 8-1? I mean, that would be so healthy and, frankly, healing for our country.
Yeah, I do, particularly when I was surprised during the oral arguments to hear the most liberal member of the court, Justice Brown Jackson, sounding like one of the conservatives and asking her questions.
Yeah. All right. And then also the other question that the Supreme Court will hear about, it has to, well, right now they're sort of waiting for Jack Smith to respond to the Trump team with regard to what the D.C. Circuit said about blanket immunity. What's that process going to look like?
Yeah, the court asked Jack Smith to respond, I think, by February 20th. To the issue that has now been brought up of the president having immunity from criminal actions, criminal prosecution or actions he took while he was president. It's an emergency petition. So the Supreme Court could simply issue a decision saying the three-judge panel of the Court of Appeals, they're the ones that said no immunity. Their decision is stayed or basically suspended until the entire Court of Appeals of the District of Columbia can make a decision on it. So I don't think we'll get a decision on the substantive merits, I think what we will get is them saying, no, this is not going to be put in place. This case is not going forward until the full Court of Appeals has had a chance to look at it.
And even if the full Court of Appeals gets a chance to listen to it, then there's a chance for a Supreme Court. So that's really going to take a bit. All right.
Yes, that's right.
A couple of other things, Hans, while we've got you. We're expecting a decision in the civil trial in New York having to do with, I think this has to do with President Trump's business dealings. This is a single judge who will make that decision, a judge where there's been lots of commentary about his bias here. What are you expecting there, and what does that appeal process look like?
Well, as you said, his bias has been evident even before he started the case. So I think you're going to see him issue a very big judgment against Donald Trump and his business. The whole point of this by the Democrats in New York is to confiscate as much of Trump's wealth as possible so that he can't be a candidate. He'll then have to appeal it up through the state courts. The state courts there are just as stocked full of hostile Democrats as this particular judge is. So, I think this case is a sign that any CEO of any company in America, you should not do business in New York if they have a law like this. I mean, this is the kind of law you'd get in Venezuela.
Last question, Hans. Thanks for working overtime with us, but there's a lot of cases. The decision we saw last week of the special prosecutor to not bring charges against President Biden, even though it was clear in that document that he had violated the law, not just in the possession of those documents, but retaining them and spreading classified information. How is that going to affect the charges against Donald Trump, where he's facing a trial on basically the same charges or the same behavior, certainly? Biden gets off. Trump has to defend himself.
Well, it adds to the claim he's making in that case of selective prosecution. Now, that doesn't often work with the courts because prosecutors have a lot of leeway in who and when they decide to prosecute. But given how important this case is, the first time a president's ever been prosecuted under the Espionage Act, of all things, I think when that case eventually gets to the Supreme Court, if it does, based on a conviction, that actually may be a significant factor the Supreme Court takes into account.
Hans von Spakovsky, Heritage Foundation. If we didn't need you here at Heritage and in D.C. and here on WMAL, I would encourage you to move back to Fulton County and run for DA.
That's right.
But because you could clean things up down there, they need you, Hans.
Thank you, Hans.
Thanks for having me.